Your response, if you would, sir, to Rishi Sunak's announcement today.
Well, good afternoon, Ian. Well, I welcome it. A number of us have been pressing for some time to increase defence spending. The threat has increased. We've seen that with Russia invading Ukraine. We've seen Iranian missiles being fired at Israel. We've seen British ships attacked in the Gulf. We've seen what China has been doing in Hong Kong and threatening Taiwan. The threats to our security have grown quite significantly in the last few years, and it's right the government should respond.
It's always, and you know this more than most, you've been in that position, you know what it's like to be in government. You have your wish list of things you need, you want to ramp up the spending, you go to see the Chancellor and the Chancellor says, you know, it's a very good idea, but I'm sorry, I haven't got the money. Everybody wants a piece of the pie, of course.
Yes, and everybody would like to spend more, and certainly anybody who's served in the military and who's aware of the threat would certainly like to spend more. And it's perfectly true. We've been slowly increasing the budget in recent years. I got it up to 2%, the NATO target, on my watch. But we now need to go further. And other countries in Eastern Europe are now spending more. Poland, where the Prime Minister was yesterday, is spending more than us at 4%. The United States has always spent more. The small Baltic states, Estonia and Lithuania, they're spending more. So, yes, we do need to get our spending up. And I'm very pleased now that the government has set out this long-term programme to get us up to 2.5%.
Where was it when you were Defence Secretary? What were the pressing areas that really needed attention? As you rightly said at the beginning, the landscape has changed. Who would have thought this point in the 21st century we would be talking about the kind of wars that we're having, whether it's with Israel and Gaza, whether it is Ukraine, the precarious nature of Russia, of course, is ongoing. Eyes are on China. I mean, the list goes on, not perhaps what our forefathers might have predicted maybe a few decades back, but nonetheless, that's where we're at. We were discussing earlier, Michael, that obviously defence comes in many forms. What were the weak points that you identified as Defence Secretary? Was it personnel or was it something else?
Well, we had a smaller army then and to some extent a smaller navy. After the Cold War finished, we thought we could do without some of these things. And then, of course, as you've said, Ian, the world started to change. In my first weeks in office, Putin was there invading Crimea, and the Daesh came back at us in Iraq and Syria, and we had a much more aggressive approach from China in the Indo-Pacific. So these things have changed over the last few years, and we've seen a very immediate threat on our own continent. And there are issues, long-term issues, that do need to be addressed. The army has got too small. It needs to be bigger. It needs to have higher tech equipment. We need to be thinking of a bigger navy, and we need to be thinking of better air defense. We've seen the damage now in the last few months, the damage that missiles can do in Ukraine, the damage they were threatening in Israel, and we do need to be better protected as a country against that. So I'm very pleased that a chunk of this new money that's going to be spent over the next 7 years is going on munitions and will go onto high-tech equipment.
I was going to, on that point of high-tech, of course, again, another landscape that has changed is that the kind of defence that is required. It might be boots on the ground, it might be rockets and tanks, but it could easily be people sitting in offices making sure that from a cyber perspective, things are safe and impenetrable, if that makes sense. That's equally, if not increasingly more important.
Yes, and it's very hard, given the lead time of developing these weapons or building ships or planning new generation of fighter aircraft. It's very difficult to be sure of where warfare will have got to when these things come off the production line in 7-10 years time. And there's always a temptation to be fighting the last war. At one stage, I was told we would never need tanks again. Well, they're using tanks. They're using tanks down in southeast Ukraine. And we certainly need to look at, our air defense again, because the missile ranges have got much longer. Missiles have got more powerful. So we need to keep up to date. And a lot of this new money is going to go not just into munitions and air defense, but is going to go into defense industries, to defense companies, to help them research the weapons of the future.
And on that point, do you trust the MOD to spend this money correctly? You can, £87 billion a year is an awful lot of money. How that is spent is as crucial as the money itself.
Yes, and there were always defence programmes, back in my time that were over budget and over time and, subject to delay, not least because the military always wants the very best of everything, quite naturally. And if something new comes along, a new type of equipment, they want to stick it on the ship that you're building or underneath the aircraft that you're planning. So that's quite natural. But I think, now there is a better grip on these things. The Treasury will certainly be watching extremely carefully, and to make sure that these big defence procurement programmes in a partnership with industry are better delivered than they have been in the past.
Of course, it may well be that Mr. Sunak's promises are not fulfilled, at least by him. We may have a change of government. All the polls are predicting that will be the case. Sir Keir Starmer says, everything's safe in my hands, nothing to worry about. But it does look as if it's, this is not a standard election coming up. This one looks like a dead cert to change colours. Do we trust Labour to do the right thing here?
Well, you must put your questions to Labour. I noticed they haven't quite committed to the 2.5%, and they should certainly be pushed on that. There are still got some weasel words around the Labour response about when economic conditions allow. But, whoever's going to be in power, the threat is not going to change. And, I would hope there'd be a reasonably bipartisan approach to this between the big political parties, that whoever's in power accepts the need now that we're not spending enough on defence, and to be safe, to properly protect our people, we do now need to increase our spending.
Can we trust Keir Starmer with the button?
Well, he said he's going to continue the nuclear deterrent. That certainly wouldn't have been the case with Jeremy Corbyn. I noticed a number of members of his potential cabinet were people who actually voted against the renewal of Trident when we had the vote 4 or 5 years ago. And that's a bit worrying. Yeah. But, you must put these questions to Labour. This is too important, actually, to be a matter of political dispute when it comes to the election. So I hope we can clear this up now. And I hope that Labour will now answer the challenge. Will you two spend 2.5% if you were to get into government? And will you fully support the nuclear deterrent?
Indeed. Always great to get your take on these things. It's a